Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Any parent, teacher, or caregiver will tell you that holding a conversation with a child is one of the great mysteries and challenges of our world. They start out cute and adorable in their formative years. Then when they reach middle school, they become almost unrecognizable, only to reappear in high school with some semblance of the person they were prior to middle school transformation. Science has also shown us that the best way to help our kids become independent, confident, kind, empathetic, and happy is by talking with them. Yet, so often, many parents, educators, and caregivers are at a loss and have trouble communicating with kids because of conversations that can feel trivial and strained, or worse, marked by constant conflict. Today, we welcome Dr. Rebecca Rolland, oral and written language specialist in the Neurology Department of Children's Hospital in Boston and lecturer at Harvard University. And of course, author of the new book, The Art of Talking with Children, The Simple Ways to Nurturing Kindness, Creativity, and Confidence in Kids. Be sure to pay attention to the pearls of wisdom and nuggets of information she will provide today. Dr. Rolland, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Let's get right into it. How important is conversation to alleviating stress and disconnection, not only with ourselves, but with our children?
Yes, I think it's really a key and something that we often pass over when we're sort of on autopilot. Really, conversation builds vocabulary, but that's just scraping the surface. So through talk, especially through this back and forth conversation, you can build so many different skills in kids and also help you bond much better. And
in your book, you mentioned this thing called rich talk. And just what is that? And I guess what is its value in the nurturing of those relationships?
Yeah, so really it's a way of talking that maximizes kind of the time we have with our kids and helps both of us relate and connect with each other. So I talk about the ABCs of rich talk. There's really three things to keep in mind. The A stands for adaptive, meaning that you're always kind of aligning with your child. So actually figuring out what mood is your child in? You know, are they upset? What kind of talk do they need right now? Not just coming in with your own idea. B stands for the back and forth. So it's not just talking at your child, but I emphasize talking with your child. So both of you talking, both of you listening, equally important. And then C for child driven. So you really want to think about, what is my child interested in now or worried about or engaged in? And starting there rather than saying, well, let me just come in with my own topic. This actually makes things a lot easier because you don't have to say, well, what should I talk about? Your child will tell you pretty much.
Yeah. And I'm glad you made that distinction just now as far as talking with your children as opposed to talking at your children or even talking to them. Because when you think of talking at or talking to, there's one direction that the conversation is flowing. When you're talking with, it's a two-way street now. And you're gathering data and information from your child that is very important that will kind of direct the course of that conversation.
Exactly. Yes, that was a very conscious choice actually about my title, is talking with kids or talking with children, because we often don't think about that. We think, oh, I have this message I want to say, or I have this thing I need to communicate, but we don't even think to say, well, what is my child's perception of that? You know, do they feel worried about that? Are they happy with having few friends when I think it's a problem? You know, that kind of thing. So actually figuring out, what's my child's perspective? How can I listen? And how can I teach them to listen is really critical.
How do we, again, as adults and as caregivers, how do we, remember, one, that kids are people too? I mean, thinking back to the old Wonderama song. Now I know I'm dating myself, but thinking about back to that song, kids are people too. But also, how do we prevent ourselves from imprinting on our kids when we're trying to have those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is just realizing and recognizing that kids of all ages have sort of big ideas and big questions, even if they're not always expressing them, but if you take the time to really sit with a child, sometimes these questions will come up. So even a young child who says, well, why don't we fly off the ground, or why can't you plant plants in plastic? These kind of things seem like small questions, but actually can lead to really big discussions about, well, what's gravity or what's, there's tons and tons of things that come out of even small children's questions. And really taking the time to sit and hear what those questions are rather than just coming in with a lesson that we want to teach. I talk about kind of close-ended questions. We often ask questions with one right answer. So, how many blocks are there? Or, what is the one thing you did in school today? But actually, if we can step back and ask more open-ended questions, we can open the floor to have children tell us much more about what they're thinking.
Give us an example of something like that, because how do we get over the one word or the monosyllabic answers when we ask a child, so how was your day today? And they say, good. How can we get them to open
Definitely.
up?
Yeah. And I know I've been there. I feel like, so many people have been there, and I even do that as a reflex myself. And I think part of it is that nobody really is expecting an answer in that situation, right? So you want an answer, but there's already, it's just sort of fine, and there's a couple of things going on. I think kids are obviously tired at the end of the day. They don't have a lot of energy to formulate something like that. And then it's actually kind of abstract, so how was your day? It's sort of like, well, if you even ask us, how was your day? Well, it's like, well, a lot of things happened. It was good. It was bad. There was lots of, there was one thing that happened. It wasn't so good. And then this good thing happened, So there's a lot to that. I actually ask my own kids just different kinds of questions to get out of that kind of rut. So I might say things like, can you tell me something really weird or strange that happened today? Or, even noticing something about your child. So with my 5-year-old, I might say like, I noticed you have orange paint all over your shirt. What happened? And, usually there'll be this, I was painting and then Jimmy did this and this, you hear a ton. Or even like, tell me about your day in 3 words or less, something like that. And so just giving kids these kind of funny challenges can actually break apart that sort of old routine.
I think I'm going to try that with my kids today, because I'm always getting that response. It was good. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Then I try to follow up. Well, what made it good? Like, elaborate. Give me some.
Exactly. Try to go down that line of questioning. Yeah.
Right. I feel like I'm a prosecutor asking a bunch of questions trying to get them to say things. But what are some ways, therefore, that we can also foster empathy in children? Because I noticed in your book you have these principles of empathy. So can you tell us a little bit what those are?
Yeah. So I really think about empathy as helping children feel for other people, take other people's perspectives, and then help in a way that's actually helpful to that person. So oftentimes we might just say, well, empathy is about being kind, but it's not only about being kind. It's actually putting yourself in another person's shoes so you know how to help someone. For example, you might have a relative and they want you to visit, but they don't want you to bring flowers, or whatever. So not everyone wants to be helped, quote unquote, in the same way. So actually helping children understand, well, how does this particular person in front of me feel? Why might they be feeling that way? How would I feel? Is that maybe different from how they feel? I think those are really key steps to developing empathy, for sure.
So it sounds like, because I think when we think of empathy, we think of treat others the way we would want to be treated. And it's not, and it's not. It's like treat others the way they want to be treated. So you really have to.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I love that distinction, because I think that's so often we have what's sort of like these very good intentions. And we think, well, I'm going to give you this purple dress because I like purple, but this person doesn't like purple at all. And so this is, not what they would have wanted. So that's just kind of a simple example. But yeah, actually helping kids realize that meeting people where they are is actually much more helpful and actually can build our relationship and build an understanding that people are all different and that that's fine.
How can we cultivate the social skills in children, especially in this age of video games and virtual reality? So to help them to be able to be more sociable when they do get in around each other. Yeah.
So one thing I think there's a couple things is one, ironically, is sometimes to step back and not necessarily try to micromanage all of these relationships. So even though I write about conversations, I think there is definitely a lot of opportunity when kids get together and teach each other, right? They give each other feedback about what's working and what's not working. And at the same time, I think you can serve as kind of your child's partner in reflection and kind of a guide too after the moment. You know, when your child says, well, this child said this to me and I said that, and we got into this argument, you know, to actually reflect with your child about what happened, what might have gone wrong, what they could do differently. I think that's a really powerful way to help rather than necessarily getting in at every argument or every conflict.
And since you brought up the idea about conflict and arguments, how can we now also, through conversation, encourage kids to kind of embrace their challenges without adding more stress on them?
Yeah, so I think that's really critical, especially in today's day and age where there is so much pressure on children, you know, to be right or to succeed. I think it's really helpful to take a step back and say, well, in order to succeed in the long run, you know, that's maybe made up of a lot of tries, a lot of persistence, a lot of bouncing back from failure. One thing I'd like to do, and I've just started with my own child, is to do what's called playing mistakes. So we actually came up with this game when my son was learning to play chess. And he got really frustrated because he was always losing. And I said, well, okay, fine, I'll just let you win, you know, then problem solved. But that's actually not really a solution because he doesn't really learn very much. And he actually didn't like it at all. He didn't like to win because he said, you're just letting me win, you know, and so that wasn't really fun either. So we actually came up with kind of a compromise, which is that I would on purpose make mistakes. And I would say, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, look at that. Can you help me find the mistake? What would you do, you know, if you were me? And actually helping analyze these mistakes, it really taught him about chess, but it also taught him, you know, how can you have a light touch and kind of a lighthearted approach when you do make a mistake, rather than saying, oh, I'm just going to collapse or I quit or, you know, I don't want to play with you anymore. And so I think modeling that in your own life and in the way you deal with challenges, I think is a really helpful start.
You know, I think that's a very important distinction to make, or a key to make, that we need to model the behavior we're really looking to find from our children, because if we can kind of be very transparent with our thought processes and things of that nature, it'll show them exactly what it is that they need to do, because we kind of expect them to just automatically know because we know. Exactly.
And I think that, yeah, what's funny is I think also is that they are always listening and they are always noticing what we're modeling, even if we're not modeling what we'd want to be modeling. So I think that's why it can be really helpful to just kind of be intentional about what that is.
Yeah, because I know my son is the same way. He gets very frustrated when he loses. And I said, well, let's try it again. And what do you think you did wrong here? And backtrack your steps and to make him see these things, and my daughter as well. So I think that's really important to, like you said, take that step back and have them kind of analyze what their paths particularly were.
It's funny because I write about this in the book. We started about kind of a conversation at dinner, which I think can be helpful, which is just, what mistake did you make today? You know, and what did you try to do to fix it? And did it work? And I think that actually normalizes mistakes also and shows kids, you know, everybody's making mistakes. Everybody around the table made a mistake today, you know, and that's okay. And that's actually good, because if we never made mistakes, we would not be trying really anything.
Right. If we didn't make mistakes, we wouldn't learn. Right.
Exactly.
There's always the great example that Thomas Edison found 5,000 ways to not make the light bulb, but he came up with the one correct way, and that's all made all the difference. Right. You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is author of the new book, The Art of Talking with Children, and Harvard lecturer, Dr. Rebecca Rolland. Let's take a different step for a second, because we talked about how we can encourage children to develop empathy with among themselves and develop empathy for other people. But what are some ways that we can actually promote their own joy and creativity while helping others celebrate their differences?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things is, one is just to really help by asking questions that are really open-ended and that expand on what they're already doing. So say, for example, this can work with a kid of any age. So you might have a toddler who's playing with a toy, or you might have a teenager who's building a model airplane or constructing a robot or whatever they're doing. And so really thinking about, well, how could you make it bigger, different? How could you expand to make it something else? What else would you like it to be? And so really helping kids think to kind of the limits of their imagination and helping them get there. I think that can be really helpful for really any age child, because we all benefit from kind of thinking out of the box, and we often don't take the time to do that.
And what are some of the, I guess, because in the book you talk about some of the, I guess, temperament triggers. So how can we identify those triggers, and then how do we deal with them?
Yeah, so I think it depends. So for every child, I talk about kind of a temperament profile. So and I think it's really helpful just to look at things. So for example, how active is your child generally? And same for you. So as an adult, how active are you generally? Or how much do you get overstimulated by lots of sounds or lights or new foods or anything like that? And same for your child. And if you notice that there are certain things that really stick out as, triggering a lot of upset, or I talk a lot about matches and mismatches between parent and child. So, for example, if you're very slow to wake up or slow to get started in the morning, and you have a very active young child, which I know well, who's up in the morning and wants to be super, super active, how can you make that work and notice that that's happening rather than just react and feel annoyed or feel as though, oh, my child is doing this to me. So this is just maybe a natural a thing of temperament. And to actually say, well, here, why don't you kick a soccer ball in the playroom? Why do you not kick it at the breakfast table? That kind of thing. Like to actually give some space and allow for that energy rather than to say, well, you're just being bad or this is wrong.
I know, because I think as parents, we tend to kind of just attribute it to, oh, that's just how he is, or that's how she is. And then we get into the game where we're comparing children. So you may have an older child you treated one way, and you figure the younger one should fall in line as well. But of course, they're a different person, so you have to do things a little bit differently. And then again, we start to imprint our own ideas of how things work on our children, expecting them to handle things the same way that we do. How can we take that step back so that we don't do those things and we allow our children to, I guess, have the space to be able to develop the way that they're supposed to?
Yeah, I do think that's so important. And I think part of the work is really to recognize when you kind of are projecting what you wanted for yourself or what you want for your child onto your child and kind of in ways that don't fit him or her. So, saying, well, I played piano and I liked it, so you should play piano, even if your child is giving all the signs that they have no interest in this. I think to really try to do that separation and to see your child as much as you can as sort of this unique person that is really exciting and surprising in their own way. And maybe they want to do things totally unlike what you've done, and to be okay and kind of celebrating that. And I think that's such an important conversation to have, that things might not be as you were, but even that can bring you some surprise and joy as well.
And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I kind of want to expand on this notion a little bit. It's about how do we introduce play into conversation? I mean, we know that we start to gamify a lot of the teaching that we do and to get the kids to be interested. How do we do that with conversation?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways. So I talk about two ways, which really is saying you can play in language, and you can play through language. So meaning that you can play language games. So things like with young kids, things like, well, let's think of rhymes, or let's make puns or things like that. Or even for older kids, like sarcasm, idioms, that kind of thing. But you can also take a playful attitude towards learning. So things like, well, that didn't work out, so let's see if we can make it kind of as bad as possible. It's not beautiful. Can we make it really ugly? And kind of taking this playful attitude rather than saying, well, let's just be very constrained about what we want. We can just flip the situation and kind of open ourselves up to different possibilities.
what is the cardboard box principle? Explain that a little bit.
Yes. So you may be familiar with this if you have any young kids, but I talk about the cardboard box principle, which has happened to me a lot, which is that you buy some kind of nice present for your child, maybe something they wanted. They open it and there's this great cardboard box, and all they want is the cardboard box. Actually, they don't really want the present, or they might see the present and play with it for 5 minutes. And then they spend 3 days painting and jumping in and doing all these things to the cardboard box. And so really, to me, that suggests just that play really is best when it's simple, when we have kind of a limited amount of stuff and that kids actually can put their imagination onto it. So they might be building, constructing, imagining, and that's actually harder to do the more complicated the stuff is that you have.
And I noticed that you spent a little time also talking about the different phases that friendships go through, because we see that a lot of times that our kids come home and we know that something's bothering them, and we tell, well, how was so-and-so, referring to their friends? Oh, we're not talking today. But then the next day they're best friends all over again. So what are those phases and how can we help to prepare our children for them?
Yeah, so I really talk about sort of children moving all the way from those kind of initial meetings and sort of the first excitement and getting to know someone, all the way through kind of these deepening relationships that really need children to be able to manage conflict in order for them to flourish. So I also talk about friendships that may be more healthy for them and those that may be less healthy for them. So it's kind of friendships that can be toxic or that feel as though the friend is always not being so nice, but your child is still friends with them and all of that. And sort of helping your child recognize what makes a good friendship. I really have seen that trying to get your child to stop playing with another child because you don't like them, it doesn't really ever work. And it really can hurt your relationship with your child, right? You kind of become in this battle and like, did you talk to that child again? And, it's not very effective. I think what's more effective in the long run is to help your child recognize what they value in a friendship and then start to understand, well, am I getting what I would like to see in this friendship? And if over time the answer is no, to help gently steer your child towards some more, healthier relationships.
Now, this question I think will help a lot of parents out there who want their kids to read more. And I know a lot of teachers do what they can in school as well. We give them, we try to find books that they're going to like as far as genres that they like reading and all those types of things. But in the art of talking with children, you described, I guess, the 3 E's of reading. So can you help our parents understand what are those 3 E's and how they can introduce that to their children? Yeah,
so I really talk about these 3 E's as being kind of key to reading, but even you can use it in other circumstances as well, which is first is just to expand. So to see what your child says, to hear what your child says, and then to expand on it. So if in reading your child says, oh, that girl looks sad, let's talk about that. What about her looks sad? What about the situation seems sad? Or does that seem sad to you? So actually starting to expand on what they're saying. The second E is called explore. And really, there's just so much research out there showing that if we can go beyond the here and now, so beyond what's in front of us directly, we can do so much to build children's understanding and their language skills. So that just means things like talking about the past, the future, about characters in books, things that are not just, about the table or the book in front of you. And so actually, if a child says, oh, that happened yesterday in the book, and what happened 100 years ago? What was different about life then? What might be different in the future? So actually helping them to make those kind of connections. And the last is evaluate. So this is actually, it's not kind of a self-critical or judgmental thing, but helping children become more self-aware. And we do that by asking questions like, well, what did you think should have happened in the book? Or, how would you have liked that story to end? So actually asking them to take a critical eye to what they're reading. You can do this also with situations that don't involve books, and really helping them start to make judgments themselves and to trust in their own judgments.
And I noticed also at the very back of the book that you have an appendix. Now, of course, most people don't read the appendix of books or anything, but this one is very important because it kind of has a bunch of, or develops like a recipe of what to tell your children in different situations at different stages of their development. So what was your thinking? And I know everything else in here was very intentional. So what was your thinking in putting that together?
Yeah, so I felt, so I wrote the whole book with the idea that I really want to get away from sort of scripted talk, say this, don't say that. I feel like there's so many parenting books that just say like, say these words and this will be better, and I didn't want to do that because I thought, conversation is organic. It should be about you and about your child. I don't want to take away agency from parents who I think they know their children best, and so I want to empower parents to do that kind of work with their children. And at the same time, I had a lot of questions just from early readers of the book saying, well, I would like a little more guidance. My child is 2 or my child is 12, and I'm not quite sure of, how to tailor this advice to them. So I made the appendix with the idea that it would be helpful to give parents a little more specific examples and guidance, not exactly in a say this, don't say that way, but in a way that's just saying, here's some examples that you could maybe learn from or be inspired by.
And how can some of our listeners find out more about some of the work that you're doing? I know they can go out and buy your book, obviously, and I'm sure it's available wherever they go to get their books. But is there anywhere else, maybe a website that they can go to for any other of the resources that you may provide?
Yeah, so they can go to my website. So it's RebeccaRolland.com, which is 2 C's and 2 L's. And I actually have a weekly newsletter I've just started, so they can find tips there. You can also find me on Twitter. So it's Rolland_RG, or on Instagram at Rebecca.g.Rolland.
Great. Thank you. And if you had to leave our audience, I guess, with one final thought about the importance of learning how to talk with our children, what would that be?
So I would say that meaningful conversations with your kids are the most important thing you can do to help their development. But at the same time, they can be fun, they can be exciting, and they don't have to take up a lot of time.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So again, we'd like to thank our guest today, author of the new book, The Art of Talking with Children, and Harvard lecturer, Dr. Rebecca Rolland, for coming on our show today.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure. And once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.